Well, hello everybody and welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to make Boeuf Bourguignon. This is a French recipe and I'm basing mine on the one that Julia Child published in conjunction with two French ladies in her Mastering the Art of French Cooking or French Cookery. I'm making a couple of little changes, but very, very minor. And it's going to be a lovely rich beef stew basically with pearl onions and mushrooms. Now lots of recipes cook the onions and the mushrooms at the same time as the beef is cooking, but in Julia Child's version the onions and the mushrooms are cooked separately and added in towards the end, and so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm sure it's going to be very, very tasty. Now it is a long process because we're going to cook the beef for between 3 to 4 hours on a gentle simmer in the oven. Some people do it just on the stovetop, but this recipe goes into the oven. And there are quite a few ingredients, so I'm going to detail the ingredients for the beef part of it first of all, and then for the onions and the mushrooms I will give those ingredients afterwards. So I start off by preheating the oven to 230 degrees Celsius, 450 Fahrenheit, and that's just for the first stage. We won't be cooking the meat at that temperature. We'll reduce the temperature before the meat goes into the oven for its full cook. So I'll go on to the ingredients. And as I mentioned, these are just the ingredients for the time being for the beef element of the dish. I have here 1.5 kilograms, 3.3 pounds of beef cut into about 2-inch pieces, and I'm using chuck steak. You can use whatever you want basically, but a cheaper cut of meat is a good idea because we're going to cook it for a long time and that will make it tender and bring out the flavour. I have 170 grams, 6 ounces of bacon lardons. I have 720 millilitres, 3 cups of red wine, 720 millilitres, 3 cups of beef stock, 15 millilitres, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 20 grams, 2 tablespoons of plain flour. I have 1 carrot which I've cut into slices and 1 onion which I've cut into slices. I have 2 cloves of garlic which I have minced, 15 millilitres, 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, half a gram, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, 6 grams, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 bay leaves. Julia Child only uses 1, but mine are quite small, so I'm using 2, and a sprig of thyme. If you don't have fresh thyme, you can use a teaspoon of dried thyme. So that's all the ingredients for the beef element of the dish. What we have to do is fry off the lardons, brown the beef, saute the onions and the carrots, and then we're ready to start assembling everything. And the ingredients for the onions are about 24 pearl onions peeled. Now I'm using frozen pearl onions which I have defrosted and I've patted them dry, and so they will be fine. I have 120 millilitres, which is half a cup of beef stock. I have 21 grams, 1.5 tablespoons of butter. I have 22 millilitres, 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil. And here I have a nice sprig of parsley and a nice sprig of thyme which I have tied together. And for the mushrooms, which is very simple, I have 500 grams, which is 1 pound 2 ounces of mushrooms, which I have quartered or chopped into decent sizes, and I'm using chestnut mushrooms. Then I have 28 grams, 2 tablespoons of butter, and 15 millilitres, 1 tablespoon of olive oil. So that's all the ingredients, and once the beef is in the oven cooking, we can go on to work with the mushrooms and the onions. And so with my heat on, I have a large Dutch oven here, but you can use a casserole dish as long as it's quite a deep one. I'm going to put my oil into the pan. And if I didn't say, I may have said vegetable oil, but it's actually olive oil that I'm using. And then I'm going to add in my bacon lardons, and I'm going to cook those until they've released some of the fat from them and they've cooked through. Then I'm going to drain those off into a bowl. So my lardons are cooked as much as I want them cooked. So I'm going to transfer those to a bowl, leaving the oil and the fat behind. And then I'm going to brown my beef on all sides. And I'm going to do that in batches, and again, as they brown, I'm going to transfer them to the same bowl that has the bacon in. So that's the last of my beef. And that's just about brown. So I transfer that to the bowl with the other beef and the bacon. And then into that fat, I'm going to put my onions and my carrots, and I'm going to cook those until they've softened a little bit. And I'm going to reduce the heat because I don't need them cooking too high. And these carrots and onions will actually be discarded from the dish later, but I will save them and I will actually use them in making some soup in a couple of days. But we don't need these for the final dish. This is just for flavouring our sauce and our meat, basically. So I'm going to cook those until they've softened a bit. That will be 5 or 6 minutes. So my onions and carrots have cooked for a good few minutes, and I'm going to take those out of the pan. They're going to go back in very shortly, but I want to deglaze the pan and then save the liquid from the deglazing. Because that will be good for the sauce as well. So I'm just going to pour a little bit of my red wine into the pan, and then I'm going to pour that out into a dish. It's going to go back in later, but I just want to deglaze that a little bit, and that's good. So I'm going to pour that off, and then I'm going to wash that pan. So I'll come back when I've washed that pan. So with my Dutch oven washed out and wiped round, I'm going to put the onions and carrots back in. Spread those over, and then I'm going to put my meat back in and the bacon. And then I'm going to sprinkle my flour over, and I'll toss that around and then sprinkle some more. And that's all my 2 tablespoons of flour. So I'm going to put that into my oven at that high temperature for 4 minutes. Then I'll take it out of the oven, turn the meat over, turn everything over, put it back into the oven for another 4 minutes. Then I'll take it out of the oven, and I will reduce the oven temperature to 165 Celsius, about 327, 328 Fahrenheit. And I'll come back when I've done that. Okay, so that has now been 4 minutes in the oven, uncovered, and then I took it out of the oven, turned it over on itself, put it back in the oven for a further 4 minutes, again uncovered. And I have now reduced my oven temperature to 165 Celsius, 325 Fahrenheit, and I'm going to put the remaining ingredients into the pot now. So I start off by sprinkling over my salt and pepper, and then I'll add in the residue of the wine that I used to deglaze the pan, pour in the remainder of my wine, and then pour in my stock. And I want that to just be covering the meat, which it just about is, so that's good like that. I'll add in my tomato paste, and my garlic, along with my sprig of thyme and my bay leaves. Give that a stir around, and I'm going to turn the heat back on and bring that up to a simmer. So with that starting to simmer, I'm going to cover it, turn this heat off, and I'm going to put that into the oven, and I'm going to cook it in the oven for between 3 and 4 hours until the meat is very, very tender. I will check it from time to time to make sure that it's not simmering too fiercely. I don't want it to simmer too fiercely. But once the meat is tender, it will be ready. So that's going to take 3 to 4 hours. And during that time, I can go on to deal with the pearl onions and the mushrooms. So as the beef cooks in the oven, I have put my olive oil and my butter for the mushrooms into a pan, and I'm just heating that up. And as that begins to froth, like that, I'm going to add in my onions, and I'm going to cook those, tossing them around until they start to brown. And those have started to brown now, and they don't brown particularly evenly, but they've taken on just that little bit of colour. So I'm going to pour in my stock, and I'm going to add in my bunch of parsley and thyme, and then I'm just going to toss that all around, and I'll reduce the heat, and I'm simply going to cover that, and I'm going to cook it on a gentle heat for 40 to 50 minutes until the liquid has just about all evaporated and the onions are nice and soft. And at that stage, I'll come back and I will cook the mushrooms. So I've cooked my onions for about 40 minutes, and the liquid has almost evaporated. That's good enough like that. So I'm going to take those onions out and put them into a bowl, and then I'll be ready to go on to cook the mushrooms. So to cook the mushrooms, I put my 2 tablespoons of butter and my tablespoon of olive oil into a pan. You can use a large frying pan, but I like to use my saucier, so that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to melt that, and then once it's foaming from the butter, I'm going to put my mushrooms in, and I'm going to cook those down until they're nicely browned. They will absorb the fat, then they will release the fat and the liquid that's in the mushrooms, and then they will start to brown. And that will take a few minutes. And that's all the cooking that needs to be done, apart from reducing our sauce once the meat is cooked. So I'll put the mushrooms in. And toss those around. And I'm simply going to cook those now until they're browned. So you can see that the mushrooms have released a lot of liquid, and that will all evaporate as I continue to cook. So that liquid is just about evaporated, and I'm going to cook these mushrooms until they take on a little bit more colour, and then they'll be ready to go into a bowl and set aside while we wait for the meat to finish cooking. So my mushrooms are now cooked. They smell wonderful, I have to say, and I'm going to transfer those into a bowl as well and set them aside. And the next thing to do is to strain all the juice and the sauce off our meat. My meat has now been cooking for a good 3.5 hours, and it is nice and tender now. I've just picked a piece up and torn it apart, so I can see that that's cooked. And what I now need to do is to separate the meat and the bacon, which is what we want out of this, and the sauce, and discard everything else. That's the onions, the carrots, and the herbs, because we discard those. So I'm going to take my time doing this. I'm going to pick out the meat, that's the beef, and then I will find the bacon later on and pick that out as well, and I put it into a bowl. Of course you could just strain this and then pick it out, but and as I do that, I will also take the juice, the sauce, and strain that. And that will let me see the pieces of bacon, which I can then transfer as well. So here I have my beef and my bacon and my sauce, and there's a little bit of fat on the top of the sauce, which I'm just going to scrape a little bit of it off. There's not very much, so I could probably just leave it in there. And one of the reasons I can leave it in there is that I'm not going to serve this today, so I'm going to cook it and then leave it to cool, and then I'm going to put it in the fridge and leave it overnight, and then I will reheat it all tomorrow, and any fat that remains will actually come to the top, so I can just pull that off before I reheat it. So what I'm going to do as the final step today is to reduce this sauce down until it is thick enough to just about coat the back of a spoon. And once that's done, I will put the mushrooms, the onions, the beef, the bacon and the sauce back into my casserole dish and heat that up to get it all combined. Then I'm going to leave it to cool down. So I'll put this onto the heat and just reduce it, and you don't need to watch that. It's just a fierce heat, cooking it until it's reduced, until it's coating the back of the spoon. So I've reduced my sauce, and it's now coating the back of a spoon. So I'm going to pour that back into the pan with the meat, and I'm going to put in my onions and mushrooms as well. And you can make this sauce as thick as you want. You can thicken it more if you want to, but because it's a stew, I like it at this thickness. So that's all there is for this recipe. But I will just take, if I can find a smaller piece of meat, I'll take a piece of it and have a taste. That meat is so tender. And the flavour is superb with that rich wine sauce as well. And then with the onions and the mushrooms, it's going to be perfect. But as I said, so you put this on the stove now and you reheat it to a simmering point. That's for a few minutes. That's to get the heat back into the meat and the onions and the mushrooms. Then it's ready to serve, maybe with some mashed potato or some egg noodles or some rice, however you want. But I'm going to let this cool down. Then I'm going to put it into a bowl and put it into the fridge and leave it overnight, and the flavour will deepen as it sits in the fridge overnight. And then tomorrow I will be ready to serve it and share it with family. So that's going to be it for this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there'll be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for the recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.